Hey everyone, welcome back. You ready for another deep dive?
Always ready to dig into some history.
Awesome. So today we're tackling a pretty big one, the end of the Islamic Caliphate.
Oh, yeah, that's a story with a lot of layers to it.
Definitely. We've got some great notes here on Islamic empires, and I think there's a lot to uncover. It's not just dates and names. We're
Yeah.
talking about power struggles.
Right, like what makes empires rise and what makes them fall.
Exactly.
Hmm.
And the Caliphate, well, it was a massive empire with so much influence. Figuring out how it all ended, that's our mission today.
Sounds good to me. Let's dive in.
All right, so the Caliphate, just to give everyone a super quick overview, was ruled by a caliph.
The caliph was a pretty important figure.
Oh, yeah. I mean, they were both the political and religious leader.
Kind of like an emperor, but also the ultimate authority on matters of faith. A lot of responsibility there.
Absolutely. And our notes point to some pretty big problems that started to emerge within the Abbasid Caliphate. That was the ruling dynasty at the time. Like, one of the first things that jumps out is this. They started relying more and more on mercenaries for their army,
Yeah, the mercenaries, they weren't exactly known for their loyalty.
or for being cheap. I imagine having to pay all those soldiers, it must put a strain on the Caliphate's resources, right?
Oh, absolutely. These mercenaries, they demanded high wages. And the problem is they weren't necessarily committed to the caliphate's cause.
So they're getting paid a ton, but their loyalty is shaky at best.
Exactly. And you can see how that would create this kind of dangerous situation where, ironically, the people you're paying to protect you could turn on you in a second if a better offer came along.
It's like the old saying, don't bite the hand that feeds you. Except, in this case, the hand might get bitten anyway.
Pretty much. And to make things even worse, the caliphate itself, well, they were dealing with some serious internal problems, like corruption was rampant.
Oh, corruption, yeah, that's never a good sign for any government, is it?
Not at all. And we're not just talking about, a little bit of bribery here and there. Some caliphs, they were living these incredibly extravagant lifestyles, spending tons of money on palaces, luxuries, you name it, all while neglecting their actual duties as rulers.
So, basically partying while the empire crumbles around them.
Yeah, essentially. And that kind of behavior, it breeds instability, it makes people resent their leaders, and it can even lead to violence, like assassinations and things like that.
Makes sense. You combine that kind of reckless spending with shaky mercenary armies, and it sounds like things were starting to get pretty chaotic within the caliphate.
Oh, for sure. And then, on top of all that, they started having some serious economic issues. We're talking government overspending, debasing their currency, which means they were messing with the value of their money.
Uh-oh, that never ends well.
It rarely does. And then inflation starts running rampant. So, yeah, not a good situation at all. It's like all these factors combined to create this perfect storm that just weakened the caliphate's hold on power.
So it sounds like a whole bunch of internal problems that were already brewing before we even get to any external threats.
Right, exactly. Like the caliphate was already teetering on the edge, and that made them vulnerable to ambitious outsiders like the Seljuk
Ah,
Turks.
the Seljuks. Now, they started as mercenaries too, right? But then they kind of took over.
Yeah, they definitely saw an opportunity and they seized it. I mean, they were brought in to do the same thing as those other mercenaries, to help strengthen the caliphate's army.
Right, but they had a few other ideas up their sleeve, didn't they?
They did. They were very skilled warriors, and as they spent more time within the caliphate, they realized how weak it really was. So they started flexing their muscles a little more, winning battles, gaining more influence. It all culminated in 1055 when they captured Baghdad, which was the heart of the caliphate.
Wow, 10 of 55. That's a pretty pivotal year. And what happened to the caliphs themselves when the Seljuks took charge?
Well, the Seljuks weren't stupid. They knew that they needed the caliphs, at least in name, to maintain some legitimacy. So they kept the caliphs around, but they basically stripped them of all their political power.
So the caliphs became kind of like figureheads.
Exactly. Like, they were still symbolically important for religious reasons, but they weren't actually making any real decisions anymore. The Seljuks were calling the shots.
That's a pretty savvy move by the Seljuks, I gotta say. They got the power without having to completely tear down the existing system. But I'm guessing this shift in power had some pretty big consequences for the caliphate as a whole.
Oh yeah, huge consequences. It basically set off this chain reaction where local rulers across the empire, they see the central authority weakening, and they start thinking, hey, maybe this is our chance to break free. And that's exactly what happened. You had all these different regions declaring independence, carving out their own little kingdoms. So the once mighty caliphate, this unified empire, starts to fracture and splinter into all these smaller, independent states.
It's almost like watching a slow-motion explosion, isn't it?
It is, and it's a pattern we see over and over again in history. When the center of power weakens, the outer regions, they tend to break away. Like, think about the Roman Empire.
Right. It eventually split apart into all these different kingdoms. So the caliphate's falling apart from the inside. And then, as if things couldn't get any worse, along come the Mongols.
Yeah, the Mongols, they were a force to be reckoned with. We're talking about some of the most skilled warriors the world had ever seen.
And not exactly known for their peaceful diplomacy.
Definitely not. They were led by Genghis Khan, who pretty much created this unstoppable war machine. They were known for their horseback warfare, their military tactics, and honestly, for being pretty ruthless. And under his successors, the Mongol Empire grew at an incredible pace, spreading from East Asia all the way to parts of Eastern Europe.
That's a massive chunk of territory.
It is. And they weren't exactly known for making friends wherever they went.
So I'm guessing their encounter with the caliphate wasn't exactly a friendly visit.
No, not at all. In 1258, the Mongols, led by Hulagu Khan, who was a grandson of Genghis Khan, they laid siege to Baghdad. And the Caliphate, well, they just couldn't withstand the Mongol onslaught.
So Baghdad fell.
Yes, and during the siege, the last Abbasid caliph was killed. That moment, 1258, it's seen as the official end of the Islamic Caliphate. Centuries of history coming to a very dramatic end.
Wow. So it's the end of an era. But it's not the end of Islamic empires altogether, right?
Right. From the ashes of the Caliphate, four major Islamic empires rose up. You have the Ottomans, who established their empire in what is now modern-day Turkey. Then you have the Safavids in Persia.
And the Mughals in India, right. And wasn't there another one in West Africa?
Yes. The Songhai Empire, centered around the Niger River. They were a major force in West Africa.
Okay, so we've got the Ottomans, the Safavids, the Mughals, and the Songhai. All pretty major players on the world stage. And they each have their own unique impact, right?
Absolutely. Each one had its own distinct culture, its own way of governing, and they all left their mark on history.
Like the Ottomans, for instance. Didn't they control those vital trade routes between Europe and Asia for centuries?
That's right. They had a huge influence on global trade for a long time. And the Mughals, under rulers like Akbar the Great, they ushered in a real golden age for art and culture in India. Think beautiful architecture, incredible paintings, a real flourishing of the arts.
And the Songhai, they were a major center of Islamic learning, weren't they?
They were, and they controlled some key trading cities along the Niger River, which made them very wealthy and influential. And then you have the Safavids in Persia. They embraced Shia Islam, which added another layer of complexity to the religious landscape of the Islamic world. They were a major force in making Shia Islam as prominent as it is today.
So it's not just that the caliphate ended, it's that something new emerged from its collapse. It's like a whole new chapter in Islamic history begins right then.
Exactly. And it's amazing to think how these events from centuries ago continue to have ripples even today. The world we live in now, it's been shaped by those events, by the rise and fall of these empires.
It makes you wonder, like, what if the caliphate hadn't fallen apart? What if they'd managed to hold on to power? What would the world map look like today?
Fascinating question. It really shows how even events from so long ago can still have this kind of hold on our imagination. Makes you want to go back and explore all the different what-if scenarios.
It does. And it reminds us that history is never just a straightforward story. It's messy, it's full of twists and turns, and it's all connected. And that's what makes it so captivating.
Couldn't agree more.
Well, on that note, I think we've covered a lot of ground today. From the heights of the caliphate to its eventual collapse, and the rise of new empires in its wake. It's a story full of ambition, conflict, and ultimately the enduring power of ideas and legacies.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the end of the Islamic Caliphate. We'll see you next time.
See you then.